The gold embossed invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by courier like some royal decree. When I saw my mother's elegant handwriting spelling out Annual Sterling Family Thanksgiving Gala, I knew I was in for trouble. Hi everyone, I'm Lucy, and at 26, I'm the youngest daughter in what my parents like to call their legacy family. You know the type. Old money, older traditions, and expectations that could crush diamonds. My family doesn't do simple holiday dinners. No, we do galas, complete with crystal chandeliers, hired staff, and enough formality to make the Queen of England feel underdressed. This year's invitation was particularly fancy, with details about the dress code, cocktail attire, the menu, 7 courses, and a note at the bottom that made my blood run cold. Special seating arrangements to celebrate our growing family tree. Before I dive deeper into this disaster, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like the black sheep in your family? If this story resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Your support means everything to me, and trust me, you'll want to follow along for what happens next. Also, share this with anyone who's ever felt overlooked by their family. Sometimes we all need to know we're not alone. Now, back to the story. Growing up as the youngest Sterling meant living in the shadows of my 3 older siblings. There's Catherine, 34, who married into European nobility, yes, actual nobility. Daniel, 32, who runs the family's investment firm. And Rebecca, 29, who's a renowned heart surgeon married to another renowned heart surgeon. Then there's me, Lucy, the creative one, who writes freelance articles and runs a moderately successful lifestyle blog. In my family's eyes, I might as well have said I make friendship bracelets for a living. The thing about being the youngest in a family like mine isn't just about birth order. It's about never being taken seriously. While my siblings were groomed from childhood to take over family businesses or marry strategically, I was told to find my passion and explore my creativity. It sounds nice in theory, but what it really meant was that they never expected much from me. I was the family's artistic experiment, the one they could afford to let wander because the real work was being handled by the responsible children. I stared at that invitation for 20 minutes, knowing exactly what special seating arrangements meant. Every year, the dining room was set up with military precision. My parents at the head and foot of the mahogany table that could seat 14, my siblings and their spouses along the sides, and me, well, I usually ended up wherever there was space left over. Last year, I literally sat on a folding chair between the china cabinet and the wall because they'd miscounted the place settings. But this year felt different. The invitation mentioned celebrating our growing family tree, which I assumed meant they were finally acknowledging my blog's success. I'd recently been featured in a major magazine and had gained over 100,000 followers. Maybe, just maybe, they were ready to see me as an actual adult with real accomplishments. I should have known better. The Sterling family mansion sits on 20 acres just outside the city, a monument to old money and older grudges. Built in 1897 by my great-great-grandfather, it's the kind of place where every room has a name and a purpose, where children are expected to use their indoor voices at all times, and where showing emotion is considered unseemly. I'd grown up playing hide-and-seek in rooms larger than most people's apartments, but I'd never felt at home there. The house always felt like a museum, where I was just another exhibit. The youngest daughter, a study in unfulfilled potential. As I drove up the circular driveway that Thanksgiving evening, I could see the warm glow emanating from the grand dining room windows. The house looked picture perfect, like something from a holiday movie where everything works out in the end. I'd spent extra time on my appearance that night, choosing a sophisticated black dress that I hoped would signal my transition from baby of the family to successful adult. I'd even splurged on professional makeup and had my hair done in an elegant updo. If they were going to judge me, at least I'd look the part of a successful woman. The moment I stepped through the massive oak doors, I was hit with the familiar scent of my mother's signature perfume, mixed with the aroma of whatever elaborate meal the hired chef had prepared. The foyer was decorated with autumn flowers that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and I could hear the gentle clink of crystal glasses and polite conversation drifting from the parlor. "Lucy, darling." My mother appeared as if summoned, resplendent in a navy blue gown that probably had its own zip code. Victoria Sterling was the kind of woman who never had a hair out of place, never raised her voice, and never let anyone forget that she came from money that predated the Constitution. "You look lovely, dear. Now let me show you to your seat. We have such a wonderful surprise planned." The way she said surprise, with that particular emphasis, made my stomach drop. In the Sterling family, surprises were rarely good news for me. They were usually elaborate ways to remind me of my place in the family hierarchy, wrapped up in pretty language and presented as gifts. Following my mother through the mansion's grand hallways felt like a death march. The walls were lined with oil paintings of stern-faced Sterling ancestors, all of whom seemed to be judging me as I passed. My heels clicked against the marble floors, echoing through the cavernous space, and with each step, I could feel my confidence wavering. The closer we got to the dining room, the more elaborate the decorations became: gold leaf trim, crystal sconces, and enough fresh flowers to stock a small florist shop. "Now, Lucy," my mother said as we approached the dining room entrance, "I want you to know that we've put a lot of thought into tonight's arrangements. We really wanted to make this special for everyone." The way she emphasized everyone made it clear that I wasn't exactly the priority in this equation. When we entered the dining room, my jaw nearly hit the floor. The main table was a masterpiece of formal dining: gleaming silverware arranged with mathematical precision, crystal wine glasses that caught the chandelier light like tiny rainbows, and centerpieces that looked like they belonged in a museum. The table could easily seat 12, and every place setting screamed wealth and sophistication. But that's not what made my heart sink. Off to the side, tucked into what used to be the breakfast nook, was a smaller round table. It was set with simpler dishes, still nice, but clearly the second-string dinnerware. The tablecloth was a cheerful autumn print that looked like it came from a department store rather than a designer showroom. And sitting around this table were my nieces and nephews, ranging in age from 8 to 16, chattering excitedly about video games and school projects. "Isn't it perfect?" My mother beamed, gesturing toward the smaller table like she'd just revealed the crown jewels. "We thought it would be so much fun for you to sit with the children. You've always been so good with them, and frankly, dear, you'll probably have more in common with them than with us adults. You know how boring our conversations get, all business and mortgages and retirement planning." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The children's table. At 26 years old, with a successful career and my own apartment in the city, they wanted me to sit at the children's table. I looked around the room, taking in the scene with fresh eyes. Catherine was already seated at the main table, discussing her latest charity work with her count husband. Daniel was showing off photos of his newest luxury car purchase to my father. Rebecca was engaged in what sounded like a sophisticated conversation about medical innovations with her surgeon husband. And then there was me, being directed to sit with children who were asking if they could have chocolate milk with dinner. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I think there might be some mistake. I'm 26 years old. I have a career. I pay my own bills. I'm an adult. Surely there's room at the main table." My mother's smile faltered for just a moment before snapping back into place like a rubber band. "Oh, sweetie, we know you're all grown up, but the main table is really for the married couples and your father's business associates. It's going to be very dull. Lots of talk about investments and politics. You'll have much more fun with the children. Besides," she lowered her voice conspiratorially, "someone needs to keep an eye on them during dinner." There it was. Not only was I being relegated to the children's table, but I was also being assigned babysitting duty at my own family's Thanksgiving dinner. I glanced over at my siblings, waiting for someone, anyone, to speak up on my behalf. Catherine caught my eye, but quickly looked away, suddenly very interested in her water glass. Daniel didn't even notice my distress, too busy laughing at something my father had said. Rebecca gave me what I think was supposed to be a sympathetic look, but then immediately turned back to her medical conversation. My 16-year-old nephew, Tyler, Catherine's eldest, looked up from his phone and caught my eye. Even he seemed to understand how messed up this situation was. "Aunt Lucy," he said quietly, "you could sit next to me if you want. I'm basically an adult anyway." The fact that a teenager showed more emotional intelligence than my entire family was both heartwarming and devastating. That's very sweet of you, Tyler. I managed, my throat tight with emotion. I could feel the familiar burn behind my eyes, the same feeling I'd gotten every time they dismissed my achievements, overlooked my opinions, or treated me like an accessory to their perfect family portrait. My father chose that moment to make his grand entrance, resplendent in a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than my car. "Ah, Lucy," he boomed, his voice carrying across the room like he was addressing a boardroom. "So glad you could join us. I see your mother's gotten you settled with the young ones. Excellent. They need someone to keep them entertained. Entertained. Like I was the dinner entertainment, not a member of the family." "Actually, Dad," I said, forcing myself to speak louder than my usual quiet voice, "I was hoping I could sit with the adults tonight. I have some exciting news about my career that I'd love to share with everyone." My father's expression shifted slightly, and I could see him calculating whether my exciting news was worth disrupting his carefully planned seating arrangement. After what felt like an eternity, he shook his head with that patronizing smile I knew so well. "That's wonderful, sweetheart, but tonight is really about family unity and tradition. The children's table is a sterling tradition." "Why, your mother sat there until she was married at 23. The comparison hit me like a slap. Of course, in their minds, I wasn't really an adult until I'd followed their prescribed path. Marriage, preferably to someone with an equally impressive family name and bank account. Until then, I was just an overgrown child playing at being independent. I looked around the room one more time, taking in the scene that would define how my family saw me. The main table gleamed under the chandelier, a symbol of adulthood and respect that I apparently hadn't earned despite being a functioning, successful member of society. The children's table sat off to the side like an afterthought, decorated with paper turkey cutouts that seemed to mock my situation. My mother was already guiding me toward the smaller table, her hand on my elbow in that gentle but firm way that brooked no argument. "Come along, dear. The children are so excited to have you join them. And look, we got you a beautiful place setting." She gestured proudly to a spot between my 8-year-old niece Sophia and 12-year-old nephew Marcus. The place setting was indeed beautiful for a child. There was a smaller plate, a plastic cup instead of crystal, and a cloth napkin with cartoon turkeys on it. It was the kind of setting you'd use for someone who might spill their drink or need help cutting their food. As I reluctantly took my seat, I could hear the conversation at the adult table shifting into high gear. They were discussing Catherine's latest gallery opening, Daniel's promotion to senior partner, and Rebecca's groundbreaking research publication. These were exactly the kinds of conversations I wanted to be part of, the kind where I could share my own professional victories and actually be heard. Instead, I was fielding questions from Sophia about whether I had a boyfriend, and listening to Marcus explain the plot of his favorite video game in excruciating detail. Don't get me wrong, I love my nieces and nephews, but this wasn't about them. This was about my family making a very clear statement about where I belonged in their hierarchy. The final straw came when my mother approached with a special plate. "We thought you might prefer the children's menu tonight," she said sweetly, setting down a plate with smaller portions and simpler preparations. "We know how you are about trying new things, how I am about trying new things. I'm a food blogger who's eaten at Michelin-starred restaurants in 12 different countries." But apparently in their minds, I was still the picky eater who used to hide vegetables under my napkin. That's when I realized this wasn't just about seating arrangements or place settings. This was about control, about keeping me in a box they'd built for me years ago and refused to let me outgrow. And as I sat there, surrounded by the cheerful chatter of actual children, while the real conversation happened just feet away, I made a decision that would change everything. The children's menu sat in front of me like a mockery of everything I'd worked to become. Chicken fingers, mac and cheese, apple slices cut into cute little shapes. Meanwhile, just 10 feet away, the adults were being served herb-crusted lamb with truffle reduction and discussing quarterly profit margins like civilized human beings. I watched as the hired server, probably younger than me, carefully poured wine into crystal glasses at the main table while I got a sippy cup filled with sparkling apple cider. "Aunt Lucy, why do you look so mad?" Sophia whispered, tugging at my sleeve with sticky fingers. Even an 8-year-old could see that something was wrong with this picture. I forced a smile and helped her cut her chicken, all while listening to Catherine regale the table with stories from her recent charity auction in Monaco. The Duchess was absolutely charming, she was saying, her voice carrying that practiced elegance she'd perfected since marrying into European society. We raised over $2 million for children's literacy programs. Of course, it helps when you can offer exclusive access to the family's private island as an auction prize. $2 million for literacy programs. And here I was, a professional writer, being fed chicken fingers at the kids' table. Daniel jumped in next, his voice booming with the confidence of someone who'd never been questioned. Speaking of impressive numbers, the firm just closed the Henderson merger. Biggest deal we've ever handled. Dad, you should be proud. All those years of grooming me for leadership are finally paying dividends. The praise from my father was immediate and effusive. That's my boy. I always knew you had the sterling instincts for business. Your grandfather would be so proud. Then it was Rebecca's turn. She was discussing her latest research paper with the kind of passion I usually reserved for my writing. The clinical trials are showing unprecedented results. We might be looking at a complete paradigm shift in how we treat congenital heart defects. Johns Hopkins is already expressing interest in funding the next phase. Brilliant, sweetheart, my mother cooed. We always knew you'd change the world. I sat there listening to this parade of accomplishments, each one met with genuine enthusiasm and respect from my parents. These weren't just their children. These were their success stories, their legacy, their proof that the sterling name meant something in the world. And what was I doing? Helping Marcus open his juice box because the straw was being difficult. The conversation at the adult table continued, flowing from business to politics to high society gossip. I caught fragments about upcoming galas, investment opportunities, and vacation homes in the Hamptons. It was the kind of substantive discussion I'd been longing to join for years, the kind where I could mention my recent interview with a Fortune 500 CEO, or my upcoming book deal with a major publisher. Instead, I was mediating a dispute between two cousins over who got the last dinner roll from the children's basket. "Aunt Lucy," Tyler said quietly, leaning over from his seat. "This is really messed up, you know. You're more successful than half the people at that table, and they're treating you like you're 12, out of mouths of babes, or, in this case, teenagers." Tyler was Catherine's oldest, and despite being only 16, he had more emotional intelligence than the rest of my family combined. He'd been watching the dynamics play out his entire life, and unlike the adults, he wasn't blind to the inequality. "It's complicated, Tyler," I whispered back, not wanting to drag him into my family drama but appreciating his support more than he could know. "No, it's not," he replied firmly. "It's actually pretty simple. They don't respect you because you didn't follow their script. But your life is awesome. I've read your blog. It's way more interesting than listening to Uncle Daniel talk about stock portfolios for the millionth time." I looked at this kid, this 16-year-old who understood me better than my own parents, and felt something shift inside me. If Tyler could see the injustice so clearly, why couldn't the adults? Why was I the only one expected to just accept this treatment? That's when I heard my name from the main table. My father was regaling the group with what he clearly thought was a charming anecdote. "You know, Lucy's always been our little dreamer. Remember when she was 12 and insisted she was going to be a famous writer? She'd lock herself in her room for hours, scribbling away in those little notebooks. We thought she'd grow out of it eventually, but here she is, still playing with words." The table erupted in polite laughter. Playing with words. 26 years old, with bylines in major publications, a book contract, and a 6-figure income from my little blog, and he called it playing with words. Catherine chimed in next. "Oh yes, and remember her phase when she wanted to travel the world? She had that whole wall covered with maps and pictures of exotic places. So cute. Of course, now she understands the importance of stability and family obligations." More laughter. They were talking about my dreams, both past and present, like they were childhood phases I'd outgrown. The worst part was, they genuinely seemed to believe their own narrative. In their minds, I was still that 12-year-old scribbling in notebooks, not a grown woman who'd turned those childhood dreams into a real career. "Actually," Rebecca added, cutting into her perfectly prepared lamb, "I think it's sweet that she's stuck with the writing thing. Not everyone needs to have a serious career. Someone has to keep the family entertained. Entertained. There was that word again. I wasn't a professional in their eyes. I was entertainment, a curiosity, the family's pet project who'd never quite figured out how to be a real adult. Meanwhile, I was still sitting with the children, helping clean up spilled drinks and pretending to be fascinated by 8-year-old Sophia's detailed explanation of her Thanksgiving handprint art project. Don't get me wrong, Sophia is delightful, and her artwork is genuinely impressive for her age. But this should have been aunt-niece bonding time, not my assigned seating for a formal family dinner. The servers began bringing out the second course, a beautiful butternut squash soup with truffle oil and microgreens for the adults, while we got tomato soup from what I was pretty sure was a can. The presentation couldn't have been more different. At the main table, each bowl was garnished like a piece of art. At our table, the soup was served in simple bowls with plastic spoons because, apparently, the children couldn't be trusted with real silverware. And I was lumped in with the children. I watched as my siblings continued their animated discussions about their accomplishments, their plans, their adult lives. Daniel was describing his latest business trip to Singapore, complete with first-class flights and 5-star accommodations. Catherine was planning her next charity event, casually mentioning celebrities she'd be inviting. Rebecca was discussing a medical conference in Switzerland where she'd be presenting her research. These weren't just dinner conversations. They were status reports, proof of their worth, and position in the family hierarchy. And what was I doing? I was cutting up Sophia's soup crackers because she couldn't manage them herself. Tyler caught my eye again and shook his head in disgust. "This is insane," he mouthed silently. "You should be over there." He was right. I should be over there, discussing my recent feature in Forbes magazine, or my upcoming speaking engagement at the digital media conference, or the book advance that was bigger than what most people make in a year. Instead, I was trapped in this bizarre alternate reality, where my accomplishments didn't exist and my age had somehow reset to preteen. That's when I heard the final straw. My mother, speaking to one of my father's business partners, was explaining the seating arrangement. "We always keep Lucy with the children at these gatherings. She's our free spirit, you know. Never quite settled into adult responsibilities like the others. We think it's important for her to maintain that youthful energy." Youthful energy. Adult responsibilities. The coded language was crystal clear. I wasn't mature enough for the grown-up table because I hadn't followed their prescribed life path. Marriage and traditional careers were the only metrics that mattered. Everything else was just playing dress-up. I set down my plastic spoon and looked around the children's table one more time. Tyler was watching me with concern. Sophia was happily coloring on her placemat. Marcus was building a small tower out of his crackers. These kids were genuinely enjoying their dinner, blissfully unaware of the power dynamics playing out around them. But I wasn't a child anymore, and I was done pretending that this treatment was acceptable. The decision crystallized in that moment, as clear and sharp as the crystal glasses I wasn't allowed to drink from. I wasn't going to spend one more minute at this table, in this chair, accepting this role they'd forced me into. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor loud enough to draw attention from both tables. Every eye in the room turned toward me, and for the first time all evening, I was the center of attention. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice carrying across the sudden silence. "I think I need some air." The silence that followed my announcement was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop on the marble floors, and trust me, in a house this size, that's saying something. Every face at both tables was turned toward me, expressions ranging from confusion to annoyance to genuine concern. For the first time in my adult life, I had the complete and undivided attention of the entire Sterling family. My father was the first to break the silence, his businessman's instincts kicking in to control the narrative. "Lucy, sweetheart, perhaps you should sit back down. We haven't even gotten to the main course yet." His voice carried that tone he used in boardrooms when someone was getting out of line. Authoritative, but trying to maintain a veneer of pleasantness. But I didn't sit down. Instead, I stood there, feeling the weight of 26 years of being overlooked, pressing down on my shoulders like a lead blanket. "Actually, Dad, I think I've had enough courses for one evening." My voice was steadier than I expected, clearer than it had been all night. My mother's face went through a rapid series of expressions: confusion, embarrassment, and then that particular brand of controlled panic she got when things didn't go according to her carefully orchestrated plans. "Lucy, dear, you're making a scene. This isn't appropriate dinner conversation." She gestured subtly toward my father's business associates, clearly mortified that their perfect family image was cracking in front of important guests. "Appropriate?" I repeated, feeling something hot and sharp rising in my chest. "You want to talk about appropriate? Is it appropriate to seat a 26-year-old professional at a children's table? Is it appropriate to serve me chicken fingers while discussing million-dollar business deals 10 feet away? Is it appropriate to treat me like I'm still 12 years old just because I haven't followed your predetermined life script?" Catherine tried to intervene, her diplomatic training from years of high society events kicking in. "Lucy, let's not make this about what?" I cut her off, my voice rising slightly. "About the fact that you've all decided I don't deserve basic respect? About the fact that I have to listen to you discuss your accomplishments while I'm relegated to cutting up crackers for actual children?" The business associates were looking deeply uncomfortable now, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. Good. Let them see behind the perfect sterling family facade. Let them witness what happened when someone finally refused to play along with this charade. Daniel, ever the problem solver, stood up from his place of honor at the main table. "Look, Lucy, if you wanted to sit with the adults, you could have just asked. There's no need to make a federal case out of it." His tone was the same one he used with difficult clients, patronizing patience mixed with barely concealed irritation. "Could have just asked?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Daniel, I did ask. I asked Mom directly, and she told me the main table was for married couples and Dad's business associates. Apparently, being a successful writer doesn't qualify me for adult status in this family." My mother's face flushed pink. "Now, Lucy, that's not what I said." "That's exactly what you said." I turned to face her fully, no longer caring about maintaining the peace or protecting anyone's feelings. "You told me I'd have more fun with the children because adult conversations would bore me. You said I needed to keep them entertained. You served me from a children's menu and gave me a sippy cup because, apparently, I can't be trusted with real glassware." The hired servers had stopped moving, frozen in place like they were watching a tennis match. Even the children at my assigned table had gone quiet, sensing the tension in the room. Tyler was watching with wide eyes, clearly fascinated by this rare display of sterling family drama unfolding in real time. My father's face was growing redder by the second. "Lucy Sterling, that is quite enough. You are being disrespectful and ungrateful. We invited you into our home for a family celebration, and this is how you repay us? Invited me?" The laugh that escaped me was harsh and bitter. "Dad, I'm your daughter. This isn't a privilege you're granting me. This is supposed to be my family. But clearly, membership in this family comes with conditions I wasn't aware of." Rebecca tried a softer approach, her medical training making her attempt to de-escalate the situation. "Lucy, we all love you very much. Maybe we can talk about this after dinner." "In private?" "In private?" I shook my head. "You mean so you can gaslight me into thinking this is all in my head? So you can convince me that being treated like a child at a formal family dinner is actually a privilege?" "No, Rebecca. We're talking about this right now, in front of everyone, because this is where it happened." My mother stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Lucy, you are being absolutely ridiculous. The seating arrangement was practical, not personal. The children needed supervision, and you're naturally good with them. There's nothing shameful about that." "Nothing shameful?" I could feel my voice getting stronger, more confident with each word. "Mom, look at this table." I gestured to the plastic cups, the simplified menu, the coloring placemats. "Look at that table." I pointed to the main dining table with its crystal and china and adult conversation. "Tell me honestly, do you see me as an equal to Catherine, Daniel, and Rebecca, or do you see me as an overgrown babysitter?" The question hung in the air like smoke from the expensive candles flickering on the main table. My mother's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. In that silence, I had my answer. Catherine finally spoke. her voice carefully modulated in that diplomatic tone she'd learned from years of navigating European social circles. "Lucy, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. We value you enormously. You bring such joy and creativity to the family." "Joy and creativity," I repeated slowly. "Catherine, when was the last time anyone in this family asked about my work? Not my hobby, my work. When did anyone congratulate me on the Forbes feature? Or ask about my book deal? Or show any interest in the business I've built from nothing?" More silence. Because the truth was, they hadn't. They'd never asked because, in their minds, what I did wasn't real work. It was a phase, a distraction, something to keep me busy, until I found a suitable husband and settled into the life they'd always envisioned for me. "You want to know what's really shameful?" I continued, my voice gaining strength from their silence. "What's shameful is that Tyler, a 16-year-old, showed more respect for my career tonight than my own parents. What's shameful is that I have to justify my worth to people who should be celebrating my success instead of diminishing it." My father slammed his hand on the table, making the crystal glasses ring like tiny bells. "Enough, Lucy. You are being completely unreasonable. This is Thanksgiving, for God's sake. A time for gratitude and family unity, not for your personal grievances." Gratitude? I felt something snap inside me, like a wire that had been pulled too tight for too long. "You want me to be grateful? Grateful for being treated like a second-class citizen in my own family? Grateful for being dismissed and overlooked and patronized at every turn?" I looked around the room one more time, taking in the shocked faces, the uncomfortable business associates, the children who were getting a front-row seat to a family implosion. For years I'd been the peacekeeper, the one who swallowed her hurt feelings to maintain the Sterling family harmony. But harmony built on my silence wasn't real harmony at all. "You know what?" I said, my voice suddenly calm in a way that seemed to unnerve everyone, more than my anger had. "You're absolutely right, Dad. This is Thanksgiving, a time for gratitude. And I'm grateful that I finally see this family clearly. I'm grateful that I have a life outside of this house, outside of your expectations. And I'm grateful that I don't have to stay here and pretend that this treatment is acceptable." I started walking toward the door, my heels clicking against the marble with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. Behind me, I could hear chairs scraping, voices calling my name, the chaos of a carefully planned evening falling apart. "Lucy Sterling, if you walk out that door, don't expect us to just welcome you back with open arms," my father shouted after me. I paused at the threshold of the dining room, my hand on the doorframe. Without turning around, I said clearly enough for everyone to hear, "Maybe that's exactly what I'm hoping for." And then I walked out, leaving behind the crystal and china, the fake smiles and real condescension, and 26 years of trying to earn a seat at a table where I was never truly welcome. The November air hit me like a slap of reality as I stepped out of the mansion. My breath came out in visible puffs, and I realized I'd forgotten to grab my coat in my dramatic exit. But I didn't care. The cold felt cleansing after the suffocating atmosphere inside. I stood on the stone steps for a moment, looking back at the warm glow spilling from the dining room windows, and felt absolutely no regret. My hands were shaking, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline of finally standing up for myself after decades of staying silent. I fumbled for my car keys, grateful that I'd had the foresight to park near the street rather than in the circular driveway behind my siblings' luxury vehicles. The last thing I needed was to be blocked in by Catherine's Bentley or Daniel's Tesla while trying to make my escape. As I drove away from the Sterling estate, I could see lights flickering on in windows throughout the house. No doubt the family was regrouping, probably holding an emergency meeting about my outburst and how to handle the PR disaster I just created in front of Dad's business associates. The thought should have made me feel guilty, but instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. My phone started buzzing before I'd even made it to the main road. I glanced at the screen. Mom calling, then Dad, then Catherine. I let them all go to voicemail. For once in my life, I wasn't going to be immediately available to clean up the mess or smooth over the awkwardness. They could sit with their discomfort for a while. I drove aimlessly through the city streets, watching normal families through restaurant windows, sharing normal holiday meals without assigned seating hierarchies or children's menus for grown adults. The contrast was stark. Here were people who seemed to genuinely enjoy each other's company, while I'd just fled from a dinner where my own family couldn't even pretend I belonged. Eventually, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner downtown, the kind of place with vinyl booths and laminated menus that was the complete opposite of my family's world of crystal and pretension. The hostess, a woman about my age with tired eyes and a genuine smile, seated me in a corner booth without asking any questions about why I was dressed for a gala, but eating alone at 9 p.m. on Thanksgiving. "Rough night?" she asked kindly, setting down a menu and a steaming cup of coffee I hadn't ordered. "You could say that," I replied, wrapping my hands around the warm mug. The simple gesture of kindness from a stranger was almost enough to make me cry. That's when my phone exploded. 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and they were still coming. I scrolled through them, watching my family's panic unfold in real time. The messages started rational and escalated quickly into desperation and anger. From Mom: "Lucy, please call me back, we need to discuss this like adults." From Dad: "This behavior is unacceptable. You've embarrassed the family in front of important guests." From Catherine: "I don't understand why you're so upset. We can talk about this rationally." From Daniel: "You're acting like a child. Come back and apologize so we can move on." From Rebecca: "I'm worried about you. This isn't like you at all." But it was Tyler's message that hit me the hardest. "Aunt Lucy, they're all freaking out and talking about you like you're crazy. I told them you were right, and now they're mad at me too. I'm proud of you for finally standing up to them." A 16-year-old was proud of me for doing what I should have done years ago. That said everything about how messed up this situation really was. I ordered a piece of pie, real pie, not some deconstructed dessert with a foam garnish, and started typing my response in the family group chat. My fingers moved quickly, fueled by years of suppressed frustration. Since everyone seems confused about why I left, let me be crystal clear. I am 26 years old. I have a successful career that I built myself. I own my own home, pay my own bills, and have achieved things that should make any parent proud. But tonight you seated me at a children's table with plastic cups and chicken fingers, while discussing your accomplishments at the adult table 10 feet away. You talked about me like I wasn't even in the room, dismissed my career as playing with words, and assigned me babysitting duty at my own family's Thanksgiving dinner. I paused, rereading my words before adding more. The problem isn't that I'm ungrateful or dramatic. The problem is that this family measures worth by one standard only: whether someone has followed your prescribed path of marriage and traditional careers. Since I've chosen to build my own life on my own terms, I'm treated like a permanent teenager who needs to be managed and entertained rather than respected and included. I hit send and watched the typing indicators appear immediately. They were all responding at once, probably in a panic about what I might say next. Catherine was first. "Lucy, you're blowing this way out of proportion. It was just a seating arrangement." Just a seating arrangement. As if symbolism meant nothing. As if the message they'd sent wasn't crystal clear. Daniel followed. "You're being overly sensitive. We include you in everything. You're part of every family gathering." Include me in everything? Yes, if you counted being present in the room as inclusion. But being heard? Being valued? Being treated as an equal? That was apparently too much to ask. My father's message was predictably authoritarian. "Lucy, this tantrum ends now. You will come back, apologize to our guests, and we will discuss your behavior privately later." Tantrum. At 26 years old, standing up for myself was labeled a tantrum. But it was my mother's message that revealed just how deep their delusion ran. "Sweetheart, I think you're having some sort of breakdown. This isn't like you at all. Maybe you should talk to someone professional about these feelings." A breakdown. Because wanting to be treated with basic respect by my own family was clearly a sign of mental instability. I stared at my phone screen, watching more messages pile up, each one proving my point better than any argument I could have made. Not one of them was asking why I felt disrespected. Not one was acknowledging that, maybe, just maybe, they'd treated me poorly. Instead, they were diagnosing me, dismissing me, and demanding I return to fix the problem I'd supposedly created. The waitress refilled my coffee cup and noticed my expression. "Family drama?" she asked, with the knowing look of someone who'd seen her share of holiday disasters. "Something like that," I replied, then found myself telling the stranger the whole story. She listened without judgment, occasionally shaking her head in sympathy. "Honey," she said when I finished, "I've got 3 kids, and I wouldn't treat my 16-year-old the way your family just treated you. You did the right thing walking out." A stranger in a diner understood the situation better than my own family. That should have been devastating, but instead, it was validating. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. I was finally responding appropriately to years of inappropriate treatment. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a call from Rebecca. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Lucy, thank God," she said immediately. "Everyone is going crazy here. Mom thinks you've had some kind of mental break. Dad is furious about the scene in front of his partners. And Catherine keeps trying to mediate like this is some international diplomatic crisis." "And what do you think, Rebecca?" I asked quietly. There was a long pause. I think maybe we haven't been as aware of how our family dynamic affects you as we should have been." It wasn't a full apology, but it was the closest thing to accountability I'd heard all night. "Rebecca, I need you to understand something. This isn't about tonight. This is about every family gathering where my opinion didn't matter, every achievement that went unacknowledged, every time you all made decisions about my life without including me in the conversation." "I hear you," she said softly. "I really do. But Lucy, walking out isn't going to solve anything. Come back and we can talk about this properly." "No," I said firmly. "I'm not coming back tonight, and I'm not coming back until this family is ready to treat me like the adult I am, not the child you remember me being." "Lucy, I'm done being the family's afterthought, Rebecca. I'm done pretending that this treatment is normal or acceptable. If you all want me in your lives, you need to make room for the real me, not the version you're comfortable with." I hung up and turned off my phone completely. For the first time in hours, the constant buzzing stopped, and I was left with blessed silence. I sat in that diner until nearly midnight, thinking about what I'd just done and what came next. Walking away from my family on Thanksgiving wasn't how I'd planned to spend my evening. But sitting in that booth, finally free from their expectations and judgments, I realized something important. I'd rather be alone and respected than surrounded by people who couldn't see my worth. The question now was whether they'd learn to see me differently, or whether I'd just discovered that I was better off without them entirely. I woke up the next morning in my own apartment, my sanctuary away from the Sterling family drama, feeling both exhausted and oddly energized. The morning light streaming through my windows felt different somehow, cleaner. For the first time in years, I'd gone to sleep without that familiar knot of resentment in my stomach. I'd finally said what needed to be said. But as I reached for my phone to check the time, I remembered I'd turned it off the night before. The moment I powered it back on, it practically vibrated off my nightstand. 87 missed calls, 153 text messages, 12 voicemails. And that was just from my family. Apparently, word had gotten out. The first voicemail was from my mother, recorded at 2:17 a.m. "Lucy, I couldn't sleep. Please call me. I think we need to have a real conversation about what happened tonight. Your father is, well, he's very upset, but I think maybe you had some valid points. Please, sweetheart, call me back." Valid points. After 26 years, my mother was finally considering that maybe I had valid points. But it was the messages in the family group chat that really caught my attention. Apparently, after I'd left, the evening had completely fallen apart. Catherine had tried to salvage the dinner by steering conversation back to safe topics, but the business associates had made polite excuses and left early. Daniel had gotten into an argument with Dad about managing family crisis situations, and Rebecca had apparently given everyone a lecture about family psychology that nobody wanted to hear. Most interesting, though, were Tyler's updates to me in a separate chat thread he'd created. "Aunt Lucy, you would have loved what happened after you left. Grandpa tried to blame you for ruining Thanksgiving, but I asked him why a successful adult woman would want to sit at a kid's table and he couldn't answer. Then I said, maybe if they treated you like the accomplished person you are, instead of like you're still in middle school, you wouldn't have needed to leave. Grandma actually agreed with me. Mom looked mortified, but Uncle Daniel said I made good points. I think you started something big. My 16-year-old nephew was fighting battles I'd been too scared to fight for myself. The thought filled me with both pride and shame. Pride that he was standing up for what was right, and shame that it had taken a teenager to make the adults in my family examine their behavior. But the real surprise came when I opened Instagram. I'd posted a simple story the night before, just a photo of my empty apartment with the caption, "Sometimes the best Thanksgiving dinner is the one you don't have to perform for." And it had exploded. Hundreds of comments from followers sharing their own stories of family dysfunction, workplace hierarchies, and being underestimated because of their age or unconventional paths. Girl, I felt this in my soul. My family still treats me like I'm 16 even though I'm 30 with my own business. Why do families think that being successful on your own terms doesn't count? The children's table at 26? I would have burned the whole house down. You're inspiring me to set boundaries with my own family. Thank you for sharing this. My direct messages were overflowing too. Women from around the world reaching out to share their own stories of family dismissal, workplace discrimination, and the exhausting process of demanding respect. Some were sharing advice, others just wanted to vent, but all of them understood exactly what I'd experienced. That's when I realized something powerful. I wasn't alone in this. There were thousands of women dealing with families, employers, and societies that refused to see them as full adults deserving of respect. My story wasn't unique. It was universal. I started responding to messages, sharing resources about setting boundaries and standing up for yourself. Without planning to, I found myself writing a long Instagram post about the experience, breaking down the psychology of family scapegoating and the importance of self-advocacy. By noon, it had been shared thousands of times. My phone rang while I was responding to comments. This time it was Catherine, and something in my gut told me to answer. "Lucy," she said without preamble, "we need to talk. Not as a family intervention, just us. Sister to sister." "I'm listening," I said cautiously. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, and I owe you an apology. Not the kind Mom wants me to give to smooth things over. A real one." Her voice was different than usual, less polished, more genuine. "I've been complicit in how they've treated you, and I didn't realize how damaging it's been." This was unexpected. Catherine had always been the diplomat, the one who maintained family harmony by avoiding uncomfortable truths. Hearing her acknowledge the problem directly was like hearing the Pope admit he had doubts. "What changed your mind?" I asked. "Tyler, actually. After you left, he gave us all a lecture that would have made my old debate coach proud. He pointed out that you're more financially successful than me, more independent than Rebecca, and more creative than Daniel, but we've spent years treating you like you're waiting for your real life to begin. He asked us when the last time was that any of us asked about your work. Not dismissed it, but actually asked about it with genuine interest." I waited for her to continue, afraid that if I spoke, I'd break whatever spell had made her capable of this level of self-reflection. "The answer was never, Lucy. We've never asked, because we've never seen your work as real work. And that's not fair, and it's not true, and I'm ashamed that it took my 16-year-old son to point it out." I felt tears starting to form, not from sadness, but from relief. Finally, someone in my family was seeing the situation clearly. "Catherine," I said softly, "thank you for saying that. You have no idea how much I needed to hear it." "There's more," she continued. "I've been following your blog for months. Yes, months. And I never told you because I was embarrassed that I'd been dismissive of it before. Lucy, what you've built is incredible. The writing, the brand partnerships, the community you've created. It's everything we claim to value in business. But we've been treating it like a hobby because it doesn't look like traditional success." I was crying now, sitting in my apartment in yesterday's dress, finally hearing the recognition I'd been craving for years. "I also need to tell you that Mom and Dad are planning to show up at your apartment today to talk sense into you. Dad thinks this is all about you needing attention, and Mom thinks you're going through some kind of quarter-life crisis." They don't get it yet, but I think they can learn. The question is whether you're willing to teach them. I looked around my apartment. My space, decorated with art I'd chosen, filled with books I'd read, organized exactly how I wanted it. This was my real life, not some extended adolescence I needed to grow out of. Catherine, I said finally, I appreciate you calling, I really do. But I'm not ready to come back and pretend everything is fine. If they want a relationship with me, it needs to be on equal terms. I'm not going to keep shrinking myself to fit into the box they've built for me. I understand, she said. And for what it's worth, I think you're absolutely right. Take all the time you need. But Lucy, don't let them convince you that wanting respect is the same as being difficult. You deserve so much better than how we've treated you. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, processing everything that had happened in the last 18 hours. My phone was still buzzing with notifications. Family members, blog followers, and strangers all weighing in on my situation. But for the first time, I felt like I had the power to choose how to respond. I opened my laptop and started writing, not for my blog or for social media, but for myself. I wrote about years of feeling invisible, about the difference between being included and being valued, about the courage it takes to walk away from people who refuse to see your worth. As I typed, I realized something important. Last night wasn't just about a seating arrangement or a family dinner gone wrong. It was about finally choosing myself over their comfort, my truth over their traditions. And that decision, terrifying as it was, felt like the most adult thing I'd ever done. The real question now was what came next. Because walking away was just the beginning. I was still in my pajamas at 11 a.m., nursing my third cup of coffee and responding to the overwhelming support from my social media followers when the doorbell rang. Actually, it wasn't just a ring. It was the kind of persistent, authoritative buzzing that could only come from someone who expected immediate compliance. I already knew who it was before I looked through the peephole. My parents stood on my doorstep like a delegation from another world. Dad was in his weekend casual attire, which still looked more formal than most people's business wear, and Mom was clutching her designer handbag like it was a shield. They both wore expressions I recognized from my childhood, the kind they used when they were about to deliver a lecture about disappointment and responsibility. For a moment, I considered not answering. My apartment was my sanctuary, the one place where I didn't have to perform or shrink myself to fit their expectations. But curiosity got the better of me. What could they possibly say that would make any of this better? Lie. I opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Good morning," I said simply, leaning against the doorframe in a way that clearly communicated I wasn't planning to be a gracious hostess. "Lucy Charlotte Sterling," my father began, using my full name like I was still 5 years old and had been caught drawing on the walls. "We need to talk. This situation has gotten completely out of hand." "Has it?" I replied calmly. "Or has it just finally gotten honest?" My mother stepped forward, her face a mask of concerned motherhood that I'd seen her practice in the mirror before important social events. "Sweetheart, we're worried about you. This isn't like you at all. You've always been such a sweet, agreeable girl. Last night you were almost hostile." Agreeable. There was the word that had defined my entire relationship with this family. I'd been agreeable when they'd overlooked my high school achievements because they weren't traditional enough. I'd been agreeable when they'd questioned my college major and suggested I switch to something more practical. I'd been agreeable when they'd dismissed my early blog as a cute hobby that I'd eventually outgrow. Agreeable Lucy, who never caused waves or demanded attention or insisted on being treated with basic respect. "Maybe the problem isn't that I was hostile," I said, not moving from my defensive position in the doorway. "Maybe the problem is that you've confused being agreeable with being invisible." Dad's face was already turning that familiar shade of red that signaled an incoming explosion. "Lucy, enough with the dramatics. You embarrassed our family in front of important guests. My business partners left early because of your outburst. Do you have any idea how that reflects on the Sterling name?" "The Sterling name," I repeated slowly. "Dad, do you know what reflects poorly on the Sterling name? Having a daughter who's been featured in Forbes, who's building a media company from scratch, who's spoken at international conferences, and treating her like she's not worthy of sitting at the same table as adults." My mother's eyes widened. "You never told us about Forbes. I did tell you, 3 months ago. You said it was nice, and immediately changed the subject to ask when I was going to find a nice young man to settle down with. The memory of that conversation still stung. I'd been so excited to share the news, and they'd brushed it off like I'd told them I'd won a participation trophy in elementary school. That's not, Mom started, then stopped, clearly remembering the conversation differently now that she was forced to actually pay attention. And the speaking engagement in London, the one where I was invited to address 300 media professionals about digital storytelling? I mentioned that too. Dad told me to be careful not to get too big for my britches. He said. The phrase hung between us like a neon sign, too big for my britches, because in their world, there was a ceiling on how successful the youngest daughter was allowed to become before it became threatening to the established order. Rebecca's car pulled up behind my parents' Mercedes, and I watched her hurry up the walkway with the determined stride of someone on a medical emergency call. She was still in her Thanksgiving dress from the night before, though it was wrinkled now, and her usually perfect hair looked like she'd been running her hands through it. "What are you all doing here?" she demanded, slightly out of breath. "Lucy, are you okay? Catherine sent me to check on you." "I'm fine," I said, amused that my sister had appointed herself the family's wellness monitor. Your parents, however, seem to be having some difficulty understanding why someone might not want to be treated like a child at a formal dinner party. Dad turned his attention to Rebecca. "Maybe you can talk some sense into your sister. She's clearly having some sort of breakdown and needs professional help." "Professional help?" Rebecca's voice rose an octave. "Dad?" She stood up for herself after being disrespected. "That's called healthy boundary setting, not mental illness." I blinked in surprise. Rebecca had always been the family mediator, the one who smoothed over conflicts with scientific explanations and rational discourse. I'd never heard her directly contradict our father before. "Rebecca," Mom said in her warning tone, "don't encourage this behavior. Lucy needs to understand that family comes first, and her little tantrum last night put that in jeopardy." Little tantrum? Rebecca's medical training had given her a vocabulary for exactly this kind of situation. "Mom, what you're describing is classic family scapegoating. Lucy has been systematically marginalized by this family for years, and when she finally addressed it directly, you pathologized her response instead of examining your own behavior." The silence that followed was thunderous. Nobody had ever accused Victoria Sterling of pathological behavior before. Hell, nobody had ever used words like scapegoating in reference to our perfect family image. "That's quite enough psychology lectures for one morning," Dad said tersely. "Lucy, are you going to invite us in so we can discuss this privately? Or are we going to continue this conversation in your hallway where the neighbors can hear?" I looked at the three of them standing there, my parents with their expectant expressions and Rebecca with her supportive but exhausted face, and made a decision. "Actually, no, I'm not inviting you in. My apartment is my space, and I'm not ready to have you in it right now." Mom gasped like I'd slapped her. "Lucy, we're your parents." "Yes, you are. And as my parents, you should want me to feel safe and respected. But right now, I don't feel either of those things with you. So until you're ready to have a real conversation about how this family operates, I think it's better if we take some space." "Space?" Dad's voice was incredulous. "Lucy, you can't just cut yourself off from your family because you didn't like your seat at dinner." It wasn't about the seat, Dad. It was about what the seat represented. It was about the fact that you still see me as a child who needs to be managed, rather than an adult who deserves to be respected. Rebecca stepped closer to the door. "Lucy, what would it take? What would need to change for you to feel comfortable coming back?" The question caught me off guard, because it was the first time anyone had asked what I needed instead of telling me what I should do. I thought about it for a moment, watching my parents' faces as they waited for my answer. "I need to be treated like an equal," I said finally. "I need my accomplishments to be acknowledged the same way you acknowledge Catherine's charity work or Daniel's business deals. I need to be included in adult conversations instead of being assigned babysitting duty. And I need you to stop treating my life choices like they're temporary until I figure out how to be a real adult." That's That's very reasonable, Rebecca said, shooting a meaningful look at our parents. But Dad was already shaking his head. Lucy, you're asking us to completely restructure family traditions just to accommodate your feelings. That's not how families work. There are hierarchies, there are traditions, there are ways we've done things for generations. And there's the problem, I said quietly. You think asking for basic respect is asking for special treatment. You think treating me like an adult is restructuring tradition. Dad, I'm not asking you to change generations of family customs. I'm asking you to acknowledge that I've grown up. Mom was crying now. Not the dramatic tears she used at charity galas when the cause moved her, but real, confused tears of someone whose worldview was being challenged. I don't understand how we got here, she whispered. I thought we were good parents. I thought we gave you everything. You gave me everything except what I actually needed, I replied, feeling my own eyes start to water. You gave me money and opportunities and education, but you never gave me your respect or your belief that I could be successful on my own terms. The conversation was interrupted by another car pulling up. Catherine's Bentley glided into view, and I watched my eldest sister emerge looking like she'd stepped off the pages of a fashion magazine, despite having probably slept as little as the rest of us. What's happening here? She asked, taking in the scene of our parents on my doorstep and Rebecca looking like she was ready to physically defend my apartment. We're having the conversation we should have had 20 years ago, Rebecca answered before anyone else could speak. Catherine nodded slowly as if this made perfect sense. Good. Lucy, I need to tell you something. I've been thinking about what you said last night and I realized I've been part of the problem too. I've let them treat you poorly because it meant I didn't have to examine my own relationship with this family. Another unexpected ally. First Tyler, then Rebecca, now Catherine. It seemed like my dramatic exit had forced everyone to actually think about our family dynamics, instead of just accepting them as normal. So what happens now? I asked, looking at all four of them standing outside my door. That was the question that would determine everything. The question hung in the air like morning fog, thick, uncertain, and impossible to ignore. What happens now? I looked at my family gathered outside my apartment door, and for the first time in my life, I held all the power in the relationship. They had come to me. They were asking for my terms. After 26 years of being the one who had to accommodate, adjust, and accept, the tables had finally turned. Here's what happens now, I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. We start over, not with apologies that are designed to get things back to normal, but with genuine changes to how this family operates. Dad opened his mouth to protest, but Catherine held up a hand to stop him. Let her finish, she said firmly. We came here to listen, so let's actually listen. I took a deep breath, thinking about all the women who had messaged me overnight, sharing their own stories of being underestimated and overlooked. I wasn't just speaking for myself anymore. I was speaking for everyone who had ever been told they were too much, or not enough, or not ready for a seat at the table they'd earned. First, I continued, if I come to family gatherings, I sit with the adults. Not because I'm demanding special treatment, but because I am an adult. I have been for 8 years now, and it's time you acknowledge that. Mom nodded quickly, eagerly. Of course, dear. That was never meant to be. I'm not finished. My interruption was gentle but firm. Second, my career gets the same respect you give Catherine's charity work, Daniel's business deals, and Rebecca's medical research. That means asking about my projects with genuine interest, celebrating my successes the way you celebrate theirs, and stopping the comments about when I'm going to get a real job or find a husband to take care of me. Rebecca was nodding approvingly. That's completely fair. Third, I said, looking directly at my parents. No more conversations about me like I'm not in the room. No more decisions made about my life without including me. And absolutely no more assignments to manage other people's children at family events, unless you're also assigning Catherine, Daniel, and Rebecca to babysitting duty. Dad's face was cycling through colors like a mood ring. Lucy, you're asking us to walk on eggshells around you. Families tease each other. Families have traditions. There's a difference between loving teasing and systematic dismissal. I cut him off. Tyler figured that out in 16 years. It shouldn't take you 63 years to learn the same lesson. The mention of Tyler seemed to deflate some of Dad's bluster. After last night's performance, even he couldn't deny that his own grandson had shown more emotional maturity than any of the adults in the room. "So what you're saying," Catherine said slowly, "is that you want to be treated like the successful, independent adult you actually are, instead of like the child we remember you being." That's exactly what I'm saying. And honestly, Catherine, the fact that you have to spell it out like that proves how messed up this has been. My phone buzzed with another notification from my Instagram post. The story had been shared over 10,000 times now, with women around the world adding their own experiences in the comments. What had started as my personal breaking point was turning into something much larger, a conversation about family respect, gender dynamics, and the courage to demand better treatment. "Lucy," Mom said quietly, "may we come in? I think this conversation might be too important for a hallway." I hesitated for a moment, then stepped back to let them enter my apartment. As they filed in, I watched them take in my space, my carefully chosen furniture, my wall of published articles, my shelves of awards and recognition from my industry. This was the life I'd built while they'd been dismissing my efforts as a phase. Dad stopped in front of my awards wall, reading the plaques and framed articles with what looked like genuine surprise. "I had no idea you'd won so many." He trailed off, apparently not knowing what to call the recognition I'd received from my industry. "Awards, Dad. They're called awards. Professional recognition for excellent work in my field." He turned to face me, and for the first time, I saw something that looked like respect in his eyes. "Lucy, why didn't you ever show us these?" "I did show you. Every time I tried to share something I was proud of, you either changed the subject or made it about when I was going to settle down and get serious about my future." After a while, I stopped trying. Mom was examining my bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines of books I'd written forewords for, magazines I'd been featured in, industry publications with my name on the cover. "My God," she whispered. "Lucy, this is really impressive." "It would have been impressive 3 years ago when I first started achieving these things," I replied. "It was impressive last year when I hit 6 figures in annual revenue. It was impressive 6 months ago when I hired my first employees. But you weren't paying attention because you were waiting for me to become someone else." Rebecca sat down on my couch uninvited, but I didn't mind. She looked exhausted, like she'd been fighting battles all night. "Lucy, I need to tell you something. After you left last night, Catherine and I went through our phones, looking at all the times you'd shared your accomplishments with us over the years. You're right. We dismissed every single one. We were so focused on our own definitions of success that we completely missed the fact that you'd already achieved it." "More than achieved it," Catherine added, settling into my reading chair like we were having a normal family visit instead of a reckoning years in the making. "Lucy, your revenue last year was higher than my trust fund distributions. Your reach and influence eclipsed some Fortune 500 marketing campaigns. You've built something incredible, and we've been treating it like a college hobby." My parents stood in the middle of my living room, looking suddenly small and uncertain. For the first time in my life, I was seeing them as people, rather than as the infallible authorities of my childhood. They were flawed, limited, and clinging to outdated ideas about what success looked like. "So what now?" Dad asked, his voice stripped of its usual commanding tone. "How do we fix this?" I sat down across from my sisters, leaving my parents standing like supplicants in my own living room. The power dynamic shift was so complete it was almost surreal. "You start by acknowledging that this isn't something that can be fixed with a conversation and a promise to do better," I said. "This is going to require genuine change in how you see me and how this family operates. It's going to mean giving up some control and accepting that I'm not the person you thought I was or wanted me to be." "What does that look like practically?" Rebecca asked. She was in full problem-solving mode now, her medical training making her seek concrete treatment plans. "It looks like Christmas dinner, where I'm seated according to my actual age and status, not according to your comfort level. It looks like family conversations, where my opinion carries the same weight as Catherine's or Daniel's. It looks like celebrating my achievements, instead of waiting for me to achieve something you consider legitimate." Mom sat down heavily in my desk chair, looking older than I'd ever seen her. Lucy, I need you to know that we never intended to make you feel less than. We've always been proud of you. Proud of the idea of me, I corrected gently. Proud of having a creative daughter. Proud of my free spirit, proud of my unique path. But you've never been proud of my actual accomplishments because you've never really understood what those accomplishments were. My phone rang, cutting through the tension. Tyler's name appeared on the screen, and I answered it on speaker without thinking. Aunt Lucy, are you okay? Mom said Grandma and Grandpa went to your apartment, and I've been worried about you all morning. The concern in my teenage nephew's voice was palpable, and I saw my parents' faces register the irony. Their own grandson was more worried about my well-being than they had been. I'm fine, Tyler. Your mom and Rebecca are here too. We're having a family meeting. Good, he said firmly, because I have something to say to all of them. Last night, after you left, I went around that table and asked everyone when the last time was that they'd read Aunt Lucy's blog, or asked about her work. Want to know what I found out? The adults in my living room looked appropriately uncomfortable. None of them could remember the last time they'd actually engaged with your career. But they could all remember the last time they'd given you advice about getting a real job or finding a husband. That's messed up, and they all need to acknowledge it. Out of the mouths of babes. Tyler had just summarized the entire problem in 3 sentences. Tyler's right, Catherine said quietly. We've all been guilty of treating Lucy's success as less legitimate because it doesn't fit our narrow definition of achievement. And that changes starting now, Rebecca added, looking directly at our parents. Right? Dad looked around my apartment one more time, taking in the evidence of the life and career he'd been dismissing for years. When he finally spoke, his voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. Lucy, I owe you an apology. Not just for last night, but for years of not seeing what was right in front of me. You've built something remarkable here, and I've been too stubborn to recognize it. Mom was openly crying now. Sweetheart, can you forgive us? Can we start over? I looked at these 4 people, my complicated, flawed, evolving family, and felt something shift in my chest. The anger was still there, but it was no longer the driving force. What I felt now was possibility. We can try, I said finally. But it's going to take time, and it's going to take consistent effort from all of you. I'm not going to keep proving my worth over and over again. Either you see me as I am now, or we maintain our distance until you can. What about Christmas? Mom asked hopefully. The family always gathers for Christmas Eve dinner. I smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. Mom, if you can figure out how to seat 5 successful adults at one table without a hierarchy based on marriage status and traditional career paths, then yes, I'll come to Christmas. But I'm bringing Tyler as my date, because apparently he's the only one in this family who's been treating me like an adult all along. Tyler's laughter came through the phone speaker. Deal. I'll even wear a tie. Dad actually smiled at that. A real smile, not his practiced business expression. I think I can manage to treat my own daughter like the accomplished woman she is. We'll see, I replied, but there was warmth in my voice now. We'll see. As they prepared to leave, Rebecca hugged me tightly. I'm proud of you, she whispered, for standing up for yourself, for demanding better. It took courage. Catherine was next, and her embrace lasted longer than our usual perfunctory family hugs. Thank you for forcing us to examine this. I think we all needed this wake-up call. My parents stood at my door one more time, but this time they looked uncertain rather than authoritative. Lucy, Mom said, would it be okay if I read your blog? Really read it, not just skim it to be polite? I'd like that, I replied honestly. Dad cleared his throat awkwardly. And perhaps you could tell me about this Forbes article sometime. When you're ready. I nodded, watching them walk back to their car. As I closed my apartment door, I realized something profound had just happened. I hadn't just stood up to my family. I'd forced them to see me clearly for the first time in my adult life. My phone was still buzzing with messages from women around the world who were inspired to have their own difficult conversations about respect and recognition. What had started as my personal breaking point was becoming a movement of people refusing to accept less than they deserved. I sat down at my laptop and started writing again, not about the drama, but about the aftermath, about the courage it takes to demand better treatment, about the difference between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity, about the moment when you realize that walking away from people who can't value you isn't just an option, it's a necessity. The Sterling family Thanksgiving had been a disaster by their standards. But by my standards, it had been the moment everything finally began to change. And that, I realized, was the most adult thing that had happened at that dinner table in years.